Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Leadership DJs podcast. My name is Dan Chase. I'm here with Jeff Mulitalo. And today we've got operational excellence expert Steve Cuthbert with us. We want to talk about systems thinking in leadership. Now, immediately when I say that, I think there are probably a lot of leadership practitioners out there and maybe even some organizational leadership experts who have never thought about systems thinking in leadership. So, Steve, can you give us an introduction to this concept? What do we even mean by systems thinking in leadership?
Systems thinking is basically an understanding that the whole is greater than the parts. And from a leadership perspective, it's this understanding that helps you utilize all your resources better and to get them to interact and work together more effectively to achieve a common purpose. And why is this important for leaders? Well, because leaders often have the only perspective of the entire system or the entire organization, as opposed to those who are just working in their functional area. So it's critically important for leaders to have a systems view of their organization.
Jeff, can you add to that definition at all? Give us some more clarity.
Well, in some ways, what Steve had to say actually is so precise and so correct, but it's also a little scary because if leaders are best postured to see how all of the different parts of an operation or an organization work together, then we have to take some time to ask ourselves the question, then why do leaders spend so much time focusing on specific things? Dan and I have talked a lot about vision as a trap sometimes, but I can't count the number of times where leaders will, particularly when they come into a new situation and they start talking about summits and where they're going to stake their flag. And so if it's important to understand how the whole is greater than the sum of its parts and how they work together, and that elevates not only the operation, but the cause and the people who are participating in it, then why do leaders spend so much time focusing on summits? I don't know if either of you have a reaction to that, but it seems to me that's really common in organizational leadership today.
I think frankly, I just think it's easier sometimes. Instead of stepping back and understanding how to get your organization to function better together from a systemic point of view. I think the problem, or not the problem rather, but the issue is that work flows horizontally through an organization, right? And typically it flows through different function or silos on its way to becoming a completed product. And these individual silos or functional areas will almost always want to work independently from the system as a whole, because they're trying to preserve their best interests, which is natural because that's their perspective. But instead of letting everybody go out and optimizing their own individual parts and starting with this high lofty vision, it's kind of more like practical work to step back and get your arms around and understand how each one of these parts of your system has to work together before you go off and start into the vision exercise, because you can go down the wrong track, I think, without that basic understanding of your system at the very get-go.
Yeah, what's interesting is I'm not organically or naturally a systems thinker. I think like lots of maybe leadership practitioners or people that study leadership. And yet this makes so much sense to me because we see a kind of similar to vision. We see people who jump immediately to, this is about me. How can I prove my worth? Maybe I'm a little anxious about my new role as a leader. And I want to prove my value. So I'm going to look at that mountain. I'm going to make it higher and farther, when really what you are doing again is it's about the leader. And rather than solving problems, one of my most important mentors in my life always said, look, you are hired to solve problems. And I think that's especially true of leaders. And you can't know you're solving the right problem without understanding the entire system. And so it's just kind of more of the same of what we've talked about previously, Jeff, if I'm understanding you guys correctly.
Oh, for sure, man. And, I know this will speak well to a lot of Steve's practices and beliefs, but anytime when you I think sometimes what happens when you start thinking about summits is a lot of times they're starting with a solution in mind. But I think if you're really serious about identifying the limitation to your purpose, the production of value, or defining a problem in that respect, getting to the root cause of it will often expose the integrated and networked nature upon which production happens, or culture. And I think that might be the reason why, might be one of the single biggest drivers, is that sometimes it's easier. Steve said earlier, it's easier not to do it. Why? Because a lot of times I think we look solution first. I think if we look to define great problems, we'll find our way to systems thinking naturally. I don't know if you agree with that, Steve, but that's my take.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, Jeff. Think about it this way: if you took all the managers in your organization and brought them together in a meeting, and you gave them the charge to all go out and start improving, I think one of two things would start to happen. One is that they would start to focus on their individual area, which makes sense, because that's what they have purview over. That's their perspective. Or they would start to point fingers at the weaknesses in other areas and say they're the problem, right? And without strong leadership to pull these players together and to really, really press on the systems thinking mindset, we have a tendency to do what we call local optimizing, which is where we just start focusing and improving parts of our organization that doesn't necessarily translate into value for the system as a whole. So I think, Dan, what you said was that a leader's role, or what your mentor said, is exactly right. A leader should be focusing on removing the top limitations that's prohibiting the system in terms of providing value, right? And those aren't going to be a lot of things. They're probably going to be 2 or 3 really, really difficult things to overcome. But if you can overcome those things at a system level, then your performance of your system really elevates, and you don't get drawn into this local optimization, type dilemma when everybody just goes out and starts spending time working in their own areas, irrespective of how that affects other parts of the organization.
The cultural ramifications of people seeking improvement and then blaming other aspects of the organization, it would make any credible leader shudder at that possibility. And that is the business case for thinking systemically. It may not be natural, like it may not be intuitive for us to automatically start thinking in systemic terms, or thinking about our organization or our people and their production in systemic terms. But I would say that once you do it, there is a powerful sense of inherent simplicity that comes when you do it correctly. And that's the real value. And I think the real argument has to be that it is essential for any leader in modern organizations today to have some minimum viable sense of how things work together in order to prioritize what to do first, what values support that, and what your leadership strategy is because of that, as it relates to how your people interact with that.
I am always willing to admit my lack of familiarity with these concepts. And yet, once I've been exposed to it, and as I listen to you talk, it seems to me an indispensable feature of organizational leadership, real organizational leadership, people who actually want to solve problems and add value rather than simply self-promoters. And we all have, there's always this drive this motivation to be a self-promoter and be like, look, you're justified in hiring me and putting me in this position, but nothing will sustain you or validate you as a leader like solving problems and adding value. And so to me, this is an indispensable part of modern organizational leadership, to use your terms. Am I getting that right, you two?
Absolutely. And just to key on something that you said is that systems thinking, I think, is intuitive to most people until we get into an organization, right? And then it kind of goes out the window for various reasons. A lot of that is that, we act out of self-interest and so forth. And only leadership can pull people out of their perspective, right? And get them to focus on how their work, you're always getting work from somebody else and then passing it along to the next function or whatnot. And unless you elevate your perspective and understand how work flows through your system to generate value, you are automatically going to be just focused on your particular area. And it takes great leadership to pull everybody out of their comfort zone and out of their perspective and get them to do what's best for the system, which almost always invariably involves having each local area subordinate, their interests to another area, which is not always, intuitive or easy to do. But that's typically what you would need to do at a system perspective.
I guess, Dan, the thesis of this discussion would have to be that leadership is incomplete if your purpose isn't informed by systems thinking. And that really should elevate how you define your principles, how you work with your people, and how you achieve production and set your priorities. And if you think about how important all those things are, it becomes de facto indispensable. And so I think to help people kind of get like their toe in the water on systems thinking, we've included a link to a blog post that basically contrasts looking at something from a summit view. There's a flag atop of a mountain, and it kind of gives you a sense of the effort you need to take, and it's like temporary motivation. But when you look at in reverse perspective from a high perch, you're looking at that same flag back out. Really the beauty and your understanding of what's important and how to proportionalize everything is in how it's in those interrelations, it's in the systems. And that's a metaphor for how great organizations are going to need to run in today's scenario and what leadership really needs to offer the people who work in those orgs. So important topic today.
Yeah, that is a great summary, Jeff. And I hope you folks listening or watching this get a sense of just how much exposure we need to this topic. I think it is that important to our really leading organizations. Steve, Jeff, thank you. It's good to get another one of these finished, and it's nice to do these podcasts together and have another one bite the dust. So thanks for your time, guys.
Your tie now looks pink. As soon as I hit record, it's like, it looks spectacular.
It's good. It's real, and it's